Hi, we're going to do a really simple meditation in our art journals today. You just need some watercolours and a wax candle or even a white wax crayon. You can use something a bit more delicate, but actually I quite like the way that this big old candle makes marks on the paper. So I'm pressing down really quite hard here and making some stripes on the page. You can't see them because the wax is clear, but they are there. Now you can draw any lines you like, wavy lines, straight lines, but more is more. So keep going, press quite hard and make a whole heap of marks in different directions. So if we haven't met before, my name is Jenna and I use mixed media art journaling as a form of prayer and worship. I'm a Christian. If that sounds something that might interest you, then do hit the subscribe button below and that will keep you up to date with more videos like this. Now, I haven't been around very much recently. I have been struggling with my health. Don't quite know exactly what's going on, but lots of fatigue, breathlessness, palpitations, and I'm sleeping for most of the day. So I haven't been able to do a lot of things that I usually enjoy doing, feel called to do. In fact, I've had to cancel a whole heap of stuff. And that has led me to thinking about limitations. My health is limiting me at the moment in all sorts of ways. But also we have limitations in our lives already. We have the limitations of the time and the space in which we live, our financial resources, our backgrounds, our educations, our minds and what they're capable of, our bodies and what they're capable of, our personalities and our giftings, the season of life in which we're in terms of whether we've got small children maybe. Sometimes we find these limitations frustrating when we hit up against them, when we feel like we want to do something and then we hit one of these limitations that seems to be in the way. And really, I just want you to take time this morning just to offer that to God, offer that frustration to God, because really there's two responses to limitations in my mind. There is the railing against it and saying, I'm not going to let this limitation stop me or get in my way. I'm going to push through and break through regardless. And I think that is a biblical response. People are always telling God in the Bible reasons why they can't do something. I'm too old, or I'm the least of the least. I'm thinking about Abraham and Sarah having kids, or Gideon hiding in his wine press. People are always telling God about their limitations, and God doesn't let that stop him if what they're doing is part of his calling for their life. And then the other response to limitations is acceptance. And this is also a biblical response. In fact, I think there's a sense in which God uses limitations to steer us into his will. So use this little bit of watercolour play as an opportunity to think about and express how you feel and think about the limitations in your life. As you start to spread the paint around, it won't be long before you hit one of the lines that you made with your wax candle, as I've done here. And those lines contain the paint. The paint won't go over those lines no matter how hard you try. You're going to have to work with the lines that you've made on your page in the same way as we sometimes just have to work with those limitations. And throughout this process, just check in with your feelings. Sometimes it's very frustrating to hit those walls, isn't it? Hit those barriers to doing what we want to do. And there's a whole load of emotions that can come up in that process, and that's okay. And you can talk to God about those emotions as we're doing this exercise. I started by filling in some of the shapes quite carefully, really. And you could do this and actually create quite a beautiful stained glass effect by, in a very controlled way, staying within the limitations of the shapes that you've made with the wax. So that's one approach. It also struck me that you kind of discover unexpected things. I've just discovered a beautiful cross that I didn't know was there. I think sometimes we don't know limitations are there. We think we're heading in one direction, and then bam, all of a sudden we discover some kind of barrier. And sometimes that can be a bad thing, and maybe sometimes that can be a good thing. That can be God saying, hey, don't go down that road. That's not where I want you to go right now. That's not for now. So start thinking about these things as you kind of spread your paint around. You can use any colours. You don't have to use the reds and the oranges that I'm using. I was feeling quite angry and frustrated about where I'm at with my health, so I think I chose angry colours. That's where I ended up with these fiery colours. So just have a play and see where it takes you. And so we hit these walls of limitation. And what are we going to do about it? Are we going to accept the limitations we have? Does that mean that we change our behaviour? So I've changed my behaviour here, hitting these lines. I've created two kind of stripes, one that's kind of a reddy orange and one that's a yellowy stripe. And so these limitations are affecting my choices and my behaviour. When I think about it, the whole of creation is actually designed by God with many limitations and boundaries that keep us safe and keep the world ordered. I'm thinking about gravity. Gravity is a limitation that keeps us helpfully anchored to the ground. That might be frustrating for those of us who want to fly around like Superman, but actually it's quite useful not to have everything floating away. So, it's checks and balances, isn't it? I'm thinking of the passage in Job where God speaks and he talks about the sea. He said, "Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place? When I said, this far you may come and no further. Here is where your proud waves halt." And I love how poetic that is, but there's a real sense, isn't there, of God keeping order in the universe through limitations. I guess I'm seeing that a bit in my body at the moment, when I have done a small amount of physical activity. My body will say no more. And the reason it's saying no more is because it needs to rest. And so it's setting that limit so that I don't go too far and do too much. There's a great passage in Acts 17 that contrasts God's limitlessness and our limitations. This is from verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he has marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. And then it says, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. So it's interesting that part of the role of our limitations is that we would seek God, that we would understand that we are not God and that we can't do everything. We can't do it all. And we need to rely on God, seek his will and seek his strength and all his resources, those heavenly resources for the things that he has called us to do. So back to the art, I was getting a bit depressed just colouring inside the lines. So I started creating this big circular pattern here, just to remind myself that God is beyond those limitations. God is not contained by his own created limits or any other limitations. He is the God of miracles. He is the God of breakthrough. Nothing is impossible with him, it says in the Bible. And I totally believe that. Like, I believe in miracles. I've experienced miracles in my own life. I believe in healing. So I do believe that God can do whatever he wants. I don't believe that sickness and disease comes from God. I don't believe he inflicts it on people. However, we do experience it. It's a result of the fall, and sometimes it's what the devil, our enemy, uses to attack us with. And when healing doesn't come, what do we do with that? We have to trust that even what the enemy intends for evil, God can use it for our good. And that is a quote from the story of Joseph in the Bible. What an amazing story to look at, to consider the role of limitations in our journey with God. You know, Joseph had everything going for him. He was his daddy's favourite. He'd had this amazing dream saying that he was going to be successful and everyone was going to bow down to him. He must have thought, hey, you know, at that point, he must have thought, hey, I can't do anything wrong. You know, my life's going to be easy. It's going to be a success. And the next thing he knows, he gets beaten up by his brothers and he's sold into slavery. And at that point, the limitation of his circumstance must have felt huge. It must have felt there's no way that these promises on my life are going to be fulfilled, because look at this limitation of where I am, my social circumstance, my job as a slave. You know, that must have all felt like limitation. Was it limitation, or was God using limitation to maneuver Joseph into the right place? And then the cycle repeats again. He's raised up in Potiphar's household. You know, he's doing really well. And then he gets thrown in jail for the accusation of adultery. And he's rotting in jail. What a huge like an actual physical limitation of a cell. Again, he must have sat there and thought, there's no way that anything good is going to come out of my life. I'm rotting in a jail cell in some foreign land. But again, God is maneuvering him so that he will eventually find favour with the king through this amazing miracle and interpretation of his dream. So there is both the reality of the limitations that Joseph finds himself in, and his willingness to work within those limitations. Okay, I'm a slave, but what can I do? I can work hard. I can be honest. I can do my best out of this situation. So his willingness to work within the limitations, but also he couldn't see at the time, but God was supernaturally using those limitations to maneuver him into a position that he would eventually use him to save Egypt and the surrounding lands and his family through the provision of food in a famine. Amazing story to ponder, this mystery of the good and the bad in the limitations that we face. So you can see on my page I am doing a slightly different technique here. I am creating shapes to kind of contain these marks with the wax crayon. So I'm kind of embracing them in a way as part of the design, while still putting my own intention behind it in terms of creating some circles. So this is kind of a hybrid of ignoring those marks, which I did with the big circular shape on the left-hand side of the page, and kind of trying creatively to embrace these wax relief marks. I'm trying here to sort of drop some watercolour paint into a wet circle, so a wet in wet technique, and to be honest it's not really working, and I think that's a reality as well. Sometimes we experiment with what we can do, and sometimes the limitations are just too much there. We just can't, we try, but those experiments don't work, and that's okay. We can just try something different. I guess what I don't want to happen though is an enlargement of the very real limitations in my life into something bigger than they actually are. So it's taken a whole lot of motivation for me this morning to sit down and paint and edit this video. There's just so much inertia in me physically at the moment that, just collecting, a pot of water from the sink in the other room just feels like a huge mountain to climb. And so I lay in bed every morning saying, I can't do it. I can't feeling. When in fact I can. I just need to do it a bit differently. I need to do it in stages. I need to break it down into smaller pieces. Because if we're not careful, fear starts to creep in all sorts of ways. So like just saying, no, I'm not going to, book to see anyone, even for a brief amount of time, because I might have to let them down because I'm not feeling very well. I fear that I won't be well enough to keep that appointment. I fear that I won't be well enough to do whatever. It doesn't have to be about health. I fear that I can't go and tell somebody that prophetic word that I've got for them because my child's going to kick off and interrupt us and I won't be able to have a good conversation. I've used that excuse so many times, blaming my children as limitations when actually it's my own worry and fear about what might happen. And we're not to be we don't want to be slaves to fear, do we? We want to acknowledge the real limitations but not let them grow so big in our head that the small things that we can do then become impossible as well. So I'm splattering some paint here to represent these small things, those small triumphs in the face of fear. So these little splatters, because they're so tiny, they don't care about the wax underneath. They're just finding a little space to present themselves. So I wanted to add a phrase to this page to sum up my personal feeling of the moment about the limitations in my life. And so I ended up writing, I will accept limits but not fear. And that was what I was feeling, having spent a little time with God and my art journal, thinking about where I'm at the moment. Now, you might end up in a completely different place. You might still want to say no to those limits in Jesus' name because you know they're not right for your life, or you might want to ask God for help with what you're facing. So you write what feels right for you, and it's all okay wherever you're at, whatever you're feeling. God can handle it, okay? So I just pray for you now, whatever you're facing, I pray that God would show you his hand, that he would assure you of his presence and his sovereignty over your situation. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for watching, folks. Thanks for all the love and support that you guys are showing me at the moment. I really appreciate it. It's really keeping me going. I don't know when I'll be back to do another video, but please do hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel if you haven't already done that, and hopefully you will get a notification when the next video is up. Okay, God bless. See you soon.